Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, A Box with No Lid. A channel I'm creating not just to bring the awareness around the lived reality trauma and removal trauma creates, but I want to bring what I've learned through my own personal experiences and my many years as a practitioner and an advocate. Now, yes, this is the next video in the adoption series, and I'm still carrying forward and I want to expand on the narrative component of the fog, that survival state that all children who are removed create to be able to be part of the families that raise them, to find to build a base and all the interpretations and structures within that base. When we get older and we need to start to work with that to heal, we need to understand it. And our narrative is the personality that we have created to survive, and how, and all the filters we have created to survive, to live, to build a life. How we've made the understandings and interpretations of everything that we've gone through in the first 3 to 5 years of our life. That's our narrative. Now, I want to bring forward, like I did in the other video on the other side of this channel, a concept or a way of viewing things called nonverbal reassurance. That's all the nonverbal cues that an infant and young child use to build that structure, that narrative, to make those decisions around who they are, how they came to be, and what their place is, and do they actually belong to the family that is raising them. And being that is in the pre-verbal stage of life, one of the most critical developmental stages of life, I want to bring it in because of the implications it creates in the complexity of the survival state of the fog, created by child removal and adoption. It is one of the key ingredients that nobody ever asks. And when it creates an issue, like so much in this world, later on, nobody wants to acknowledge. It is denied. And that is, what changes? What are the fundamental things that change when you remove a child from biological parents and place them with non-biological parents to be raised? Whether it's in a long-term care situation like foster care, if they are lucky to get enough a long-term care situation, most foster care cases, there's multiple placements before they achieve that. Or where you're looking at removal for adoption. What changes? One of those key things is we are designed, the majority of information we take in and how we assess our environment, ourselves, and our world is nonverbal. You have two veterans in a room, they can communicate a decade's worth of information in a glance. They can communicate such huge understandings. You look at all the ways that we learn. You look at sports people on the field. Anywhere there's shared group experiences and there's shared understanding, there's all this information that is moved through in a glance. You look at how people's demeanor and facial recognitions and all these structures around assessment and how we assess threat. When we're looking at mannerisms, when we're looking at postures, when we're looking at vocal tones, when we're looking at all this, so much of our physiology is around assessing sensory, nonverbal input. And it's a two-way street. And we use this to identify ourselves, where we are, and the part we play, what we're going to do, and how we're going to interpret and respond. So what changes if we're designed with the majority of our sensory input being nonverbal? What changes when you remove biological parents and are placed with non-biological family to be raised? Where we know, and there's enough studies now to clearly prove how infants recognize the facial structure of their biological family, the mum and dad. They recognize the vocal tone of their mother in utero as it starts. They recognize the tone of the mother's voice. They recognize the tone of the father's voice and any other significant people that are around during their development a lot. So their siblings or other relatives that may be living in the house. You know, the parents may be having their own parents stay for periods of time. When you're looking at polyvagal theory and you're looking at all the structures around the development of the vagus nerve and all the associated peripherals, all the sensory pathways are all put into place pre-verbal. So what changes? What changes when a child goes, these are not my biological family? So all the markers that I'm genetically designed to use, all the tools I'm genetically designed and born with to use, to be able to connect and assess these parameters, which are completely structured around being safe and secure and having an actual presence or worth or value or belonging in the family that is raising me. All that is removed. And when you're placed in a non-biological family, you add the step that all the processes of assessment have to be learned and developed. And how do you teach a non-verbal infant how to learn and develop? It comes through experiences and constant replication of experiences. Constant dependence of these same circumstances are going to happen time and time and time and time again. Enough over the first several years to be able to embed, theoretically to be able to embed, because it is theoretically, to counterbalance all the biological that was prevented, all those markers to hopefully replace. Because people in general believe that if a child is raised in a non-biological family, if the parents pay enough attention, they do all the goo-goos and gagas and playing and all this kind of stuff, do it enough, you will replace that biological marker. The majority of the world accepts that. I don't, because it's not done continuously for years. The novelty wears off. I see it all the time, and I see its implications and aftermath all the time. In the beginning, the photos and the videos, everybody's a bunch of happy. Everybody's playing and interacting, the kids giggling and laughing. Everybody goes, oh, this is wonderful. But if you go back to that same place 12 months later, I can guarantee you that in the majority of cases, that is not. The engagement is not as long, it is not as sincere. And when you are placed in a situation where you have to develop how to interpret, any betrayal of your initial belief is recognized. And these infants and children, or these developing children, recognize, well, what's changed? They haven't, but their engagement with me has. And as we know through all the studies and information around children and trauma, and children and threat, and children and stress, is children blame themselves. We have only got ourselves to interact with, and we go, well, what have I done? And that turns from a secure place in being part of a non-biological family being raised into that family is a potential threat. And if there's enough reaffirmations that it is a threat, it becomes a threat. That is a component of why adoptions fail. It is a huge component of why adoptions fail. It is also a huge trigger with the expectations that the adopted parents have that they need to have fulfilled. The emotional things, well, I want to feel this because I'm doing this. When the baby starts to, or the young child starts to withdraw, there's huge triggers on that. And again, competitiveness of trauma and all this stuff that occurs breaks that connections, that developing connection with a non-biological family, and turns it into a trauma environment. It turns it into a survival environment. It turns from a child that I can relax and be part of this family, develop and grow and build a life, to I have to navigate, I have to negotiate, I have to learn and develop a way to interpret and survive this, to get through it. And that interpretation becomes the basis of the narrative in the fog. And that is what I see so often when you're looking at attachment trauma coming from child removal, is there's this narrative of separation in close attachments. There's a narrative of the instructions that we follow is not conducive to a prosperous long-term relationship. It undermines it systematically. And when things go wrong, we go back into that withdrawal state to try to work out, well, what's going on? What have I done? And then there's the automatic thing of, well, it's always my fault. Why is it always my fault? Why are you always blaming me? And it feeds into this same repetitive pattern developed in the first 3 to 5 years of life, because that is how we taught ourselves to engage. Now, when everything's all sunshine, you ask a person this, they go, no, I don't do that. But when we're under threat or stress, we do. That is when this narrative becomes, a front line of what we do, because it's there, we've developed, it's tried and true, and that's what has kept us going. It is what has kept us to survive. We rely upon it. It is automatic. It is who we are, for want of a better analogy. And it's developed in a pre-verbal, non-verbal process. And in the world of adoption and child removal, yes, this is in general, but I'm doing this video, this is on the adoption side, in an adoption and foster care, structure. It is all the other layer that you have to deal with when you're looking at it from a therapeutic process standpoint, is the child had to develop non-biological ways of assessing. And if the therapist doesn't understand that, and the majority of therapists do not, there is zero training in this stuff that I'm aware of, bar adoptees who are become therapists and learn and develop it themselves. But I've never seen it written in any meaningful way in any textbook or in any research study or any therapeutic training manual. I've never come across this. I've spent decades trying to teach this. This added step of having to develop a way of assessing what everybody has normally in their biological interactions with a biological family, if that is not accurate, or if that is slightly altered due to the anger of an adopted parent, or the neglect or absence or abuse or any other forms that happen so commonly within the world that is adoption and foster care, then the pathways, the nonverbal pathways that therapists rely upon for their clients to understand and to work with this stuff do not exist. Or they exist in a state that is altered from the understanding of what that therapeutic pathway is. So they need to be understood, assessed, and worked with before working on healing attachment trauma and working on how to interpret and using neuroception, looking at co-regulation and all these other components. All this stuff has to be changed because there's another step that needs to be put in place, and that is understanding just what the structure of non-verbal recognition of attachment and connection and belonging and interpretation is. All the cues that are there. Understanding that is a critical component of understanding non-verbal reassurance, because we don't trust the words that are being spoken to us. We understand what's going on around the body language and posture of the person saying them. That is assessed and believed far more strongly than anything they say. That needs to be understood to be able to move forward. I really hope this video makes sense, and I really hope that it is valued, because it is a very key and critical understanding that is needed when healing from removal and adoption trauma. I love you guys' comments and feedback. Please be mindful, please be safe, and I'll see you all next time.